Hey, good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever in the world that you are. This is Mike Odegaard of the Social Network Shaman, and we're going to talk about a topic today that I entitled Programming the Next Generation via Social Networks. So we've had a few different discussions the last few weeks and the last few months about social networks, how these things are basically reprogramming us through the ways, shapes, and forms of how information is distributed, fake and false information. And being the researcher that I am, I wanted to do some more in-depth analysis on why the hell this stuff happens, and if there are people that share this information, regardless of what side of the political spectrum they're on, if these people really support the beliefs that they're posting, or if there's something else that's deeper and much darker based on how social networks are built, etc. And the research that I did is kind of frightening. For some reason, it always is. Don't ask me why. And it's not like I'm searching for this stuff, because I don't really like fear-mongering. It actually ticks me off to no extent. But I think it just makes sense to be truthful about the information and the research that I do and pass this on so you make up your own mind. This podcast and all the podcasts that I do is not here to convince you that my opinion is correct. It's here just to give you a thought process to think about some of the topics that I'm hopefully not wasting my time on, that help us understand why social networks are as dangerous as they are, and using that information not to completely go cold turkey, because that's almost impossible in this day and age, but to use that information because knowledge is power. And that information helps and informs us about the decisions that we do and make every day based on those social networks. So social networks have become ubiquitous and an essential platform for communication, information sharing, and social interaction today. However, there's growing concern that social media corrupts our worldview. That's the way we view the world, but also more importantly, the morals, the standards, and what we believe is true, untrue, what is personal to us, whether it's a religious type of belief, whether it's a societal type of belief. These types of things are impacted by different types of mechanisms of propaganda and fake news and false information. And they have an impact on our beliefs, our attitudes, behaviors, but also our mental and our physical health, because the way we think over time definitely impacts our physiology and also our mental capacity and our mental health. So when I talk about things like people are basically suffering from the different types of problems like mental disorders, or people are basically getting more depressed, there's a reason for that. And part of that is the social networks up until now that we've researched were the way the apps are. They endlessly scroll, so you never find an end to anything. You always have to constantly keep on going. And the second thing is the likes and these perceived love or complex interactions in the brain. They trigger different types of chemicals that we get addicted to very quickly, because that's the way we are as human beings. They're chemicals that go through our body, whether it's emotions, whether it's something else. We get addicted to it fairly quickly because that's just the way the bodies are. And then if they're people that are greedy and malicious, they use these things, whether it's in social engineering or the different types of technologies that are out there to keep us focused. Now, I talked before that apps for social networks, all of them, keep us focused. And the reason for that is simple. Social networks are a sales platform. They make money off of our attention. The only way that they can make money is that when advertising is hosted, while we're flicking through these screens and wasting our time reading things that we're normally not even interested in, but then we get exposed to. So the longer we are using these apps, or the longer we're on the website, the more money social networks can make. So their objective is one thing: keeping us focused in a virtual reality that they manufacture that makes it even easier for us to get addicted, because the more screen time that we have on the apps, which they measure every second, that equals or equates to more revenue that they can generate. And this is a multi-billion or trillion-dollar industry that we're talking about here. Okay, so at the end of the day, social networks are not about social. Social networks are about money, and we are the product. And you've heard me say this before. So it gets interesting when we take a look at how information is shared, how that changes our physiology, our mental capacity, and how we are again social engineered by these apps to basically do things where we kind of basically shut off our logic brains and don't even think about the information that we're sharing. And I'll get to that a little bit later. So let's talk about propaganda and fake news. What is that? What are some of the general types of definitions? Please keep in mind that even the academic community can't even agree on what these definitions are. So I'll use a basic one. Take what resonates with you. If you want to change it, that's up to you. I'm not here to convince you. That's not my job. It's your job to find out what information resonates with you and take and use that to protect yourself and your mental sanity. So propaganda is a form of communication that aims to manipulate people's beliefs and attitudes by presenting information in a biased and selective way. Propaganda can take many forms, such as advertising, political campaigns, and media manipulation. Social media provides an ideal platform for propagandists, that's the people that basically sell this stuff and pay social networks to get exposed to you, to spread their message, targeting specific audiences and distributing information quickly and easily. So every type of social network app that you download on your phone registers and records what other apps you use, and it shares information and puts you into a group. Once it puts you into a group, that profile then makes it extremely easy for them to use that information to then be able to host the different types of advertising and information so that they keep you interested as long as possible. So fake news, here's the definition that I found. Fake news is a type of propaganda that involves the spread of false or misleading information disguised as news. Fake news is often designed to appeal to people's emotions and prejudices and cannot be easily distinguished from real news. So here again we have social engineering, appealing to emotions, our belief systems, and basically exploiting them to host information that they pay social networks for to influence and to coerce your opinion. Now, when we're talking about normal greedy companies in the United States or the UK or wherever we are, that's one thing, it's bad enough. But this situation gets much worse when we think about nation states and interest groups and cybercrime groups that sell this exposure to reprogram entire countries, democracies, etc. So when I talk about Russia, China, and other countries that use this as an espionage type of tactic, it's extremely amoral, and it should be something that's banned by the UN, if that even really makes a difference, and the Geneva Convention, because you're basically treating every person that uses a social network app as a combatant, even though most people aren't. And we're talking about a reach of more than 2 billion people worldwide right now that use social network apps. Usually, a lot of us use at least 2 to 4 different types of these apps at any given time of the day. So that information that's disguised and appeals to the emotions and prejudices then shuts a part off in our brain that is responsible for logical thinking. And this is done by design. So let that sink in for a second. So the information that we have, regardless of whether you're Democrat, Republican, or whatever your political view is, we are all using an app that is programmed to keep our attention, to host us with advertising because we're the product, and the advertising is not vetted by these companies because if they did that, they would be like making less money. So even though all of us have these discussions about Democrats, Republicans, independents, whatever your view is, even religious things, think about what's really going on. Think about you're on a platform, it's there to make money, you are the product, no one gives a damn about your political or religious view, but you are a product, and as long as I can keep you there emotionally engaged and you get pissed off at everyone else, the more pissed off you get, the less you think. Even if you're an academic And I see this all the time, whether it's me, whether it's other people. The only reason I talk about this and do research on it is because I want to find out how people are hacking me. So this is not to blame other people, but it's trying to find out why this crap works as good as it does and what can we do to stop it. So fake news, propaganda. That stuff's basically marketing, fancy schmancy talk for, we want to sell you stuff that's not true. And the more emotional responses we can get from you, the longer you stay on our app, the longer you stay on your app, the more money we make. Ka-ching. Okay, so how do these things impact our beliefs, our attitudes, and behaviors? So by using propaganda, fake news, and social media, this does significantly impact our beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. How does it do that? So firstly, they can create a distorted view of reality by presenting a biased and selective view of events. This leads to the formation of false beliefs and attitudes, which can have a negative consequence for us as individuals and our societies. Secondly, propaganda and fake news can create a sense of fear and anxiety among people. Depression, fear, anxiety. People in that situation. Okay. So this leads to adopting extreme views and behaviors such as prejudices, intolerance, and violence. In severe cases, this can lead to radicalization of individuals and the formation of extremist groups. Interesting. Social media platforms making money off of us, putting us in a state of fear and anxiety we no longer think, makes us easy to control, regardless of what side of the fence we're on. There may be a bigger picture here. So, thirdly, propaganda fake news can undermine the credibility of legitimate sources of information, such as news organizations and government institutions. This can lead to a breakdown of trust in these institutions, which can have severe consequences for democracies and social stability. The use of propaganda, fake news, and social media can significantly impact our beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. And here are some specific examples. So, distorted view of reality. Propaganda and fake news can present a biased and selective view of events, creating a distorted view of reality. For example, during the 2016 U.S. election, fake news stories were spread on social media, which claimed that Hillary Clinton was involved in a child sex trafficking ring. I believe that was Pizzagate. The false information led to the formation of false beliefs and attitudes among some people, which may have influenced their voting behavior. It did. And there were reports out that these articles that were pushed out on social media, they came from Russia. This is a fact. You don't have to believe me, don't really care if you do or not, but these are facts, and you can research them yourself. Don't take my word for it. Secondly, fear and anxiety. Propaganda and fake news can create fear and anxiety among people. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many false claims and conspiracy theories spread on social media, such as the idea that the virus was created in a lab or a hoax. We still don't really know if it was or not. People are starting to gravitate towards the lab, but back then it was based off of fear-mongering and information without research. Now, there's a difference. There's a big difference. And those of us who have gone to colleges or universities or just have done research papers and stuff like that, you know that there's a lot of research that goes into this stuff before you actually talk about things, at least in an academic setting. This is slightly different in social media. I'll get to that later. So the false claims led to fear and anxiety among people, which may have influenced their behavior, such as hoarding supplies, refusing to wear masks, or even engaging in violent behavior. 3. Prejudice and intolerance. Propaganda and fake news can appeal to people's emotions and prejudices, leading to adopting extreme views and behaviors, such as prejudice and intolerance. For example, many false claims and conspiracy theories spread on social media during the Syrian refugee crisis, which portrays refugees as terrorists and criminals. These false claims led to negative attitudes and behaviors towards refugees, such as discrimination and violence. If you think about what's going on in Syria right now, a lot of people talked about Turkey and the earthquakes that happened. No one's really wasting any time talking about Syria. And the people in Syria, they have it even worse than you could even imagine. I mean, the entire country is pretty much already in shambles. And heaven forbid you're in one of the regions that have been heavily bombed by Russia and by Turkey. And then you have an earthquake, and there's even less of infrastructure there. If you get hurt in some way that's dramatic, you will likely die because there's no working hospitals, there's no running water, electricity in a lot of the areas. That's pretty horrible. And that is in 2023. Interesting. So, last one, undermining credibility. Propaganda and fake news can undermine the credibility of legitimate sources of information, such as news organizations and government institutions. For example, during the 2020 U.S. election, many false claims and conspiracy theories spread on social media claiming that the election was rigged or widespread voter fraud happened. These false claims led to a breakdown of trust in the electoral process and the credibility of government institutions. So, if we take a look at this, if we conclude, using propaganda, fake news, and social media can significantly impact our beliefs, our attitudes, our behaviors. This impact can be damaging, leading to a distorted view of reality, fear and anxiety, prejudice and intolerance, and breakdown of trust in legitimate sources of information. It's crucial for us as individuals to be aware of the potential risks associated with social media and to take the steps that we need to protect ourselves from propaganda and fake news. This also includes being vigilant about the sources of information that we consume and verifying information before sharing it and developing critical thinking skills. So I'm going to stop here. I mean, this is easily a topic that we can do, and I wrote down my notes and stuff to do the research to make sure I'm not talking about BS. There's research out there about sharing information. And I wanted to talk about that really briefly in this part of the podcast. I'm going to make this one a little bit shorter today. So there's one in cognitive sciences. It's called The Psychology of Fake News. And in this report, was released in 2023 from, I think, the University of Virginia Research, the Institute for Data Systems, or Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and a few other universities. In the psychology of fake news, Gordon Pennycook and David G. Rand basically took a look at literature and tried to assess what is the psychology of fake news. Why is fake news so successful? Why is it so hard to distinguish? And why do we as people share fake news? Is it because of our political views? Is it part of our conspiracy beliefs, or our superstitions or rumors, or what they call bullshit receptivity and misperceptions? Or is it basically because there may be other factors? And the interesting thing about this research is, and this blew my mind, the gist of this entire thing, and it's multiple pages here, they basically go into a few things. So what they're saying is, so what is it about human psychology and its interaction with social media that explains the failure to distinguish between accurate and inaccurate content online? Apart from being a theoretical interest, these questions have practical consequences. Developing effective interventions against misinformation depends on understanding the underlying psychology of how people do things and why they do things. So in this report, they basically talk about truth discernment. And truth discernment basically is just saying, how do we ascertain if something is true or not? And does our belief system basically influence that? Or are there other factors that influence why we share things? And there's a few passages I wanted to read from this that were really interesting. I hope it's okay. So, taken together, the evidence therefore suggests that political identity and politically motivated reasoning are not the primary factors driving the inability to tell truth from falsehood in online news. One potential answer which follows the earlier reference work on political identity argues that deliberative System 2 reasoning is often motivated by political identity, and that people engage in identity protective cognition. By contrast, more classical reasoning accounts, i.e. accounts that are more consistent with work on dual process reasoning in other domains, portray system 2 thinking, reasoning as being responsible for correcting faulty intuitions. This perspective therefore predicts that people who deliberate more will simply be less likely to believe false content and are better able to discern between true and false content, regardless of political concordance, that means what political beliefs they believe in, of the news that they are evaluating. So then it goes on to say, how then do people determine news veracity? The correlation between cognitive reflecting, that means thinking about things before you post them and are they true or not, and disbelief in fake news is stronger in cases where the content is more obviously implausible, and vice versa for true news. So fake news that is blindingly obvious that it's fake news because it's completely impossible, these are easier things to detect and to filter out. This suggests that in cases where people actually do stop and think, relevant prior knowledge is likely to be a critical factor. Indeed, political knowledge is positively associated truth discernment for political news content, as is media literacy and general information literacy. Similarly, basic science knowledge is positively associated with truth discernment for misinformation about COVID-19. This implies, unfortunately, that reasoning may not improve accuracy in contexts where prior knowledge is heavily distorted. For instance, by partisan media consumption or misinformation campaigns by political elites, or climate changing being a prime example of that. Thus, when it comes to role of reasoning, it seems that people fail to discern truth from falsehood because they do not stop to reflect sufficiently on their prior knowledge, or have insufficient or inaccurate prior knowledge, and not because their reasoning abilities are hijacked by political motivations. So this goes on to say, and there's 2 more papers. One of them is Social Media, Why Sharing Interferes with Telling Truth from False, from Valerie F. Reyna, and this is from the Human Neuroscience Institute Center in Ithaca, New York. And the second one is from Science Advances Research article, that's this one, The Social Media Context Interferes with Truth Discernment, from Epstein, Serlin, Arechar, Pennycook, and Rand. Pennycook and Rand were in one of the other articles, so they do a lot of research on psychology and how people, or how we as humans basically come to specific judgments and make our decisions. And in these 2 things, it basically says that, let me read one of these for you. It has been argued that social media environments often lack salient cues for the epitomistic quality of content that exists in other contexts. Unlike traditional media, which naturally filters content for veracity with professional gatekeeping, social media is participatory and therefore allows mostly anyone to post mostly anything. This is true. Quickly scrolling through a newsfeed that combines news and emotionally evocative non-news content and prior work shows that time, pressure, and distraction, as well as emotional arousal, can reduce the extent to which people discriminate truth from falsehood. So I talked before about fear, anxiety, propaganda, fake news. So now what we are discovering through the research, and this was all released in 2022, from 2019 to 2023. These 4 articles are from 2023, so this year. And it basically says that social media is built to value sharing information more than the truth of the information. So, and our psychology, the way we act as human beings, that is being used specifically because of the chemical reactions that we have for likes and being accepted and stuff like that. So here we have a social network which is built to keep us pegged or focused on scrolling endlessly for hours. And we also have a system that doesn't value truth over sharing because you want to be social. So it's more important for you to share the information rather than making the decision, is this information that I'm sharing true or not? And this applies to both sides. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, if we're talking to you as folks, or any other political party. It's as if your brain goes full retard, and the function that is responsible for assessing if something makes sense or not is based off of our own experience, is based off of our knowledge of certain topics, like basic topics. So when we have these things and we're not put under pressure and we're not distracted, which means we're not using social networks because it distracts us and it pressures us to do things, then you can very easily see when articles are true or bullshit. When we, though, are not, or when we're on social networks, it's as if this function in more than 53% of all the different types of information that is shared gets turned off, and you no longer have that ability because social networks value more of sharing social information rather than it does the quality of the information that you're reading. So the next question was then, well, can we explain this because people share information they know it's false because of their political opinions or their beliefs? And the research goes on to explain that in fact is not the case. The problem that we have with social networks is that it keeps us distracted and it keeps us pegged, and it constantly retrains the brain by giving us a whole bunch of bogus and BS information that then distorts our view of reality. When it distorts our view of reality, we are easier to be manipulated by propaganda and fake news, which is an endless cycle. So if you are not on social networks for a week and you read, academic literature, books, stuff like that, you can very easily tell if an article in a newspaper that you read is BS, bogus, or if it's the truth. Because you're not in social networks, you're not under pressure, and you don't have to share anything. But as soon as you have to share something, i.e. you're on a social network, that part of the brain that assesses true and false gets turned off. And guess what? Social networks understand this, and they know this. Because you are being taught that it's more valuable to share whatever it is that you're thinking or that you read, rather than valuing if what you're sharing or reading is true or false. So when you think about the ramifications of that, and you think about why we experience depression, why we experience pressure, anxiety, and fear, it's not that hard to understand where all this stuff is coming from. Not everything, but a big portion of it. So your fear and anxiety will grow exponentially the more you use social networks, because there's no filters in social networks. It gives you everything that it thinks you want to see, whether it's your opinion or not, to keep you focused so that it can sell you more advertising and more information. Since social networks don't filter information for true or false, it leads to an endless spiral where we're constantly being retrained to not be logical thinking anymore, to not turn on those functions in the brain that tell us whether someone is lying to us or not. So most of the reality that you build, if it's from social networks, is completely false. It has nothing to do with actual reality. And since fear and anxiety are great sales tools that social networks use, they are more interested in keeping us in a situation of fear and anxiety because it makes us easier to manipulate. So that's it for this session today. I hope it was useful. There's a lot more research that we'll be going through in the next few podcasts. Thank you for your time. My name is Mike Goodicke, Social Network Shaman. See you soon.